A woman is taken away in the middle of a foggy London night. But here's the twist. She did nothing wrong. So why was she arrested? Chapter 1. The Fatal Visitor. April 11th, 1866. 9:00 in the evening. Rain poured steadily, trailing down the soot-stained windows of 28 Cannon Street, nestled deep in the heart of Victorian London's bustling commercial district. Outside, the streets were almost empty, save for the occasional horse-drawn hansom cab, splashing through puddles, its wheels rattling noisily on the slick cobblestones. Gas lamps flickered weakly in the storm, their glow shimmering on the brass nameplate of Messrs. Bevington, leather sellers and merchants, a proud business established in 1702. Inside the solid 4-story building, the night felt peaceful. Sarah Milson, the housekeeper, sat by the warm fire along with another servant, Elizabeth Lowe, each cradling delicate china cups of tea. The leather showroom below had already been locked and shuttered for the night. Inventory in the warehouse was secured. Everything seemed settled for a quiet evening indoors. At 59, Sarah had been housekeeper at Bevington's for 7 years. She knew this building like the back of her hand, every creak in the floor, every cold draft that slipped through the windows. Her days followed a reliable rhythm. But this night would not be like the others. That rainy April evening began like any other. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 9, its brass pendulum swinging in a steady rhythm. Sarah had just finished repairing a small tear in the hem of Elizabeth's apron, a tiny rip that had annoyed the younger woman all day. Setting the needle and thread aside, Sarah stretched her fingers to ease the stiffness brought on by the evening chill. The fire crackled warmly. Rain continued to drum gently against the windows. Elizabeth poured another cup of tea, and just as she did, the sharp ring of the street bell pierced the stillness, slicing through the quiet scene like a blade. Startled, Sarah gently placed her teacup down, her expression turning curious. She glanced at the grandfather clock as if confirming what she'd just heard. In all her years working at Bevington's, she couldn't recall ever having a visitor at this hour, especially during such heavy rain. But then something changed in her face, a flicker of recognition. Her brow furrowed not in confusion, but in knowing. "I know who it is," she murmured to Elizabeth, as she stood up and straightened her collar. Those would be some of the last words Sarah Milson would ever say. She picked up a candle holder from the mantel. The stairwell gas lights were always kept low to save money, and began making her way to the front door. Her footsteps echoed softly in the quiet building. Down the narrow servant staircase, she descended past the offices where Mr. Bevington managed the firm's business, past the grand showroom, lined with polished leather goods, until she reached the heavy street entrance. Back by the fire, Elizabeth remained seated unbothered. Sarah often answered the door for tradespeople or late deliveries, so there seemed little reason to worry. Minutes ticked by 10, 20. The fire crackled softly. The rain still beat against the glass. But when nearly an hour had passed and Sarah hadn't returned, Elizabeth began to feel uneasy. She stood and called down the stairwell, her voice at first gentle, then increasingly anxious. "Mrs. Milson, Sarah." Silence. Only the echo of her voice returned. Gripping her own candle, Elizabeth started down the stairs. Somehow the stairwell felt darker than usual, the shadows longer, deeper. She called out again, her voice now tinged with fear, and then she saw it. At the bottom of the staircase, on the black and white checkered tiles of the entrance hall, lay Sarah Milson. She was motionless. A pool of dark blood was slowly spreading from beneath her head, staining the floor and seeping into the grout between the tiles. The candle she had carried was shattered beside her, its wax already beginning to harden on the cold floor. But what drew Elizabeth's breath into a scream was the blood, so much blood still oozing from deep wounds in Sarah's skull. Chapter 2. A scene of peculiar details. When Inspector James Harvey arrived at 28 Cannon Street about an hour later, the rain was still falling steadily. Even before he stepped inside, he had already heard whispers from the constables something was strange about the scene. Harvey was a veteran officer in the City of London Police with 20 years of experience under his belt. He was proud of the fact that he had seen just about everything, but this was different. The body itself was shocking. Yes, multiple blows to the head, likely with a blunt object. Brutal, but not unheard of. What caught Harvey's attention were the details around the body, the small things that made his instinct twitch. Sarah's shoes, for instance, black leather worn from use but neatly polished, had been removed and placed carefully on the hall table. They sat side by side, perfectly aligned, as if Sarah had taken them off for a quick nap, not as if she'd been attacked. Oddly, there wasn't a single drop of blood on them. "Why would a killer take the time to arrange his victim's shoes?" Harvey muttered, jotting a note into his small pocketbook. Nearby, a small crowbar, the kind used for opening packing crates in the warehouse, was lying on the floor. It looked like the murder weapon, though strangely it appeared almost clean with barely any visible blood. What's more, another crowbar was missing from its usual spot in the storage room. And then there was the matter of the gas light. According to Elizabeth, Sarah lit the stairwell gas lamp every night at 8 o'clock. It was a habit as automatic as breathing. But tonight the lamp was snuffed out, though not turned off at the meter. Someone had extinguished it intentionally. Perhaps most unsettling were Sarah's keys found scattered across the stairs like forgotten coins or dropped tears. It suggested either a sudden struggle or a moment of utter surprise. As Harvey examined the evidence, Elizabeth Lowe sat nearby, pale and shaken. She gave her account with a trembling voice, recounting the sharp ring of the doorbell, Sarah's strange comment, "I know who it is," the long wait, and then the horrifying discovery. But it was what happened next that chilled Inspector Harvey to the bone. After finding Sarah's lifeless body, Elizabeth had run to open the door and seek help. There, on the rain-soaked doorstep, stood a woman in a dark cloak, her hood dripping with water as though she had been waiting. "Please," Elizabeth had begged. "There's been a murder, help." But the woman's response was hauntingly calm. "Oh dear, no, I can't come in." And just like that, she vanished into the night, swallowed by the rain and darkness, leaving behind only more questions. Chapter 3. Secrets of the Victim. As the first light of dawn touched the rooftops of London, Inspector Harvey turned his attention to Sarah Milson's past. At first glance, she seemed to be a model of Victorian respectability, a quiet, church-going woman who kept detailed household records and was highly trusted by her employers. The Bevington family spoke warmly of her, describing Sarah as kind, loyal, and dependable. But as Harvey dug deeper, a different picture began to emerge, one painted in shadows. Sarah hadn't always been a Milson. She was born Sarah Bennett in 1807, the daughter of a modest shopkeeper. She had married young, perhaps too young, to a man named Thomas Milson, who, though charming, had proven irresponsible and unreliable. Eventually, he abandoned her. In a time when divorce was nearly impossible, Sarah was trapped. As a deserted wife, she couldn't legally remarry, yet society offered little support for single women. Desperate for security, she made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. She married again, this time illegally. By law, her second marriage was bigamous, but it gave her a new name, a new standing, and a fresh start. That secret remained buried for years until someone discovered it. Someone had used it against her. Someone had threatened to reveal her past unless she paid. And when she could no longer keep up the payments, that someone may have silenced her forever. Chapter 4. The investigation begins. The City of London police launched their investigation with full force. Detective Sergeant William Palmer was assigned to assist Harvey, an officer known for his sharp eye in financial crimes. It didn't take long for the two men to uncover the truth behind Sarah's double life, and more importantly, the identity of the man who had been blackmailing her. The warehouse at Bevington's transformed overnight into a scene of intense police work. Constables searched every corner, dusted surfaces for fingerprints, a technique still new and unreliable at the time, and questioned staff and neighbors. Meanwhile, the Bevington family, clearly worried about their company's reputation, urged the police to resolve the case swiftly. Back in Sarah's modest room, Harvey and Palmer found records that painted a clear picture of her final months. There were detailed notes of small payments made again and again, always to the same person. They found unsigned letters full of threats to expose her past if she didn't pay. The handwriting was shaky but forceful, and then came the witnesses. Several people remembered seeing a particular man visiting Sarah always after dark, and always leaving with something hidden beneath his coat. The pattern was unmistakable, systematic blackmail, carefully planned, coldly executed. It had drained Sarah's limited savings and pushed her into a corner she couldn't escape. Chapter 5. The suspect, William Smith. William Bill Smith was exactly the kind of man Victorian society feared a gentleman who had gone astray. Born into privilege, the son of an Eton-educated father, Smith himself had attended one of England's most prestigious schools. He had every advantage, education, manners, connections. But that polished exterior hid a darker nature. Over time, a growing pile of gambling debts and a taste for luxury living dragged him down a dangerous path. By 1866, Smith was already known to police, not for violent crime, but as a con artist and blackmailer, a man who navigated high society with ease. His refined manners opened doors that would remain firmly shut to the typical criminal. He had a knack for uncovering secrets, and even more so for using them to his advantage. When Harvey's investigation began pointing to Smith, the pieces seemed to fall into place. The motive was clear. Sarah's secret bigamy gave him the perfect leverage for blackmail. The opportunity was there. Witnesses confirmed he had been in London that night, and the means at 6 feet tall and athletic, Smith would have had no difficulty overpowering an older woman. But even with all these alignments, proving his guilt would be far more difficult. Chapter 6. Investigation Challenges. As the case unfolded, it exposed the limitations of police work in Victorian London. Inspector Harvey and his team were committed, but they were also held back by the era's primitive investigative tools. In 1866, forensic science was still in its infancy. Blood typing had not yet been discovered, fingerprinting was experimental and not legally accepted, and crime scene photography was rare and unreliable. Most police work depended on careful observation, witness statements, and old-fashioned detective instincts. Social pressures added yet another layer of difficulty. Sarah's bigamy scandal, once uncovered, began to overshadow the murder itself. The Bevington family, eager to protect their business and social standing, wanted the matter resolved quietly and quickly. Witness reliability also became a challenge. Stories changed, memories blurred, and the identity of the mysterious woman seen on the doorstep remained unsolved despite widespread searches and newspaper appeals. Nature itself didn't cooperate. The heavy rain on the night of the murder had washed away potential evidence, muddy footprints, possible blood trails, anything the killer might have left behind outdoors was gone. And then there was jurisdiction. The City of London Police had authority only within a limited area, the financial heart of the city. But Smith's residence in South London required careful coordination with local police forces, slowing progress even further. Chapter 7. Key Evidence Analysis. Despite these difficulties, Harvey's team pressed on focusing on key pieces of potential evidence. A breakthrough came when police searched Smith's lodgings in South London. Among his belongings, they discovered clothing with what appeared to be blood stains. At the time, testing for blood was extremely limited, but the police sought the advice of leading physicians and chemists. Using basic microscopes and early chemical tests, experts attempted to determine whether the stains were indeed human blood and if they could somehow be linked to Sarah Milson. The results were inconclusive, but intriguing. More substantial were the financial records found in Smith's possession. They revealed a man under immense pressure, gambling debts, angry letters from creditors, and a lavish lifestyle he could no longer afford. It painted a portrait of a desperate man in need of quick money. But perhaps the most damning clue came from an unexpected source. A pawnbroker stepped forward, claiming Smith had sold him a locket silver spoons and a cameo ring items that matched belongings Sarah was known to have. When confronted, the pawnbroker admitted he had been threatened into silence, but guilt had finally driven him to speak up. Still, the case wasn't airtight. If Smith had indeed killed Sarah and taken her valuables, why weren't the items missing from her room? And if the blood-stained clothing belonged to the crime, why had no traces been found at the scene? Chapter 8. Expert Perspectives. The murder at Cannon Street captured attention beyond the police force. Some of Victorian London's leading experts began to weigh in on the case. Dr. Alfred Swain Taylor, a pioneer in forensic toxicology, was consulted. While blood analysis was beyond the science of his time, Taylor's expertise in detecting poisons helped rule out the possibility that Sarah had been drugged before her death. Other scholars in the emerging field of medical jurisprudence also joined the discussion. Dr. Henry Leth, a respected authority on medical evidence, examined the crime scene and offered insights suggesting the killer may have had some medical knowledge or anatomical understanding. Meanwhile, legal scholars debated how the evidence was collected and whether it could be used in court. At a time when Victorian law was still evolving, the case began to set legal precedents that would influence future criminal investigations. Psychiatrists, then called alienists, also studied the case. They found the psychological details fascinating. The deliberate extinguishing of the gaslight, the careful removal of shoes, and Sarah's familiarity with her killer suggested that this wasn't a crime of random violence or mere robbery. There was something deeper, something more personal at play. Chapter 9. Psychological Analysis. What kind of mind commits such a crime? The alienists of the era struggled to understand the mental state behind the Cannon Street murder. The case was riddled with contradictions. The violent nature of the attack, multiple blows to the head, suggested rage or panic. But the careful arrangement of Sarah's shoes and the extinguished gaslight pointed toward calm planning and control. One detail drew particular interest: the removal of Sarah's shoes. Some speculated it might carry religious significance, perhaps an act of reverence like removing shoes before entering sacred ground. Others saw it as a gesture of intimacy, implying the killer and the victim shared a closer relationship than simple blackmail. The gaslight being turned off pointed clearly to premeditation. Someone had known where it was and why it needed to be extinguished. Someone familiar with the building's routines and who knew how to use darkness as cover. And then there was Sarah's final remark. "I know who it is." That didn't sound like fear. It sounded like recognition. Had she expected this visit? Had she opened the door to someone she trusted only to be betrayed? Chapter 10. Narrative Twist Revelation. Just when it seemed like the case against William Smith was unshakable, everything took a sharp turn. A new witness came forward, claiming to have seen a different man leaving 28 Cannon Street that same night. This man had the same height and build as Smith, but was dressed in the distinctive uniform of a railway worker. The revelation threw the investigation into disarray. Could there have been two suspects had Smith been framed, or was the witness, like so many others, simply confused, a victim of memory under pressure? And then the mystery deepened even more. A young painter named William Henry Hall, just 22 years old, walked into a police station and confessed to the murder, but under questioning his story, fell apart. He couldn't describe any crime scene details, and it became clear he had no real connection to the case. His confession seemed to be nothing more than the ramblings of a disturbed man, someone seeking attention or trying to insert himself into a sensational case. But his appearance raised new questions. Why would someone falsely confess to such a violent crime? What hidden motives were driving these strange new developments? Chapter 11. The trial begins. The trial of William Smith at the Old Bailey in June 1866 quickly became the most talked about event of the season. Newspapers covered every detail, and artists filled the illustrated papers with vivid courtroom sketches. Public interest was so high that people lined up for hours just to get a seat in the gallery. Smith's defense team was nothing short of impressive. They had brought together some of the sharpest legal minds of the time, and they were ready to fight every single claim made by the prosecution. Their strategy was clear: tell a different version of events, question the strength of the evidence, and provide a solid alibi that could not be broken. The prosecution started with confidence. They outlined a motive of blackmail, explaining how Smith was under intense financial pressure. They also pointed to what they believed was strong physical evidence tying him to the crime. Gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor said, "We will prove that William Smith, driven by desperation and greed, committed this horrible act to silence his victim once and for all." But the defense had come fully prepared. One by one, they brought forward a total of 11 witnesses who all testified that Smith had been at a private club in Slough playing cards the entire night of the murder. These were not just random individuals, they were well-known and respected members of the community, including a local magistrate and a respected banker. Then came the blow that shook the prosecution's case. The bloodstains once believed to be crucial evidence were re-examined by Dr. Lethaby, now testifying for the defense. His analysis showed that the stains were not blood at all. Instead, they were from cogging, a red dye-like substance used in hat making, a material Smith had come into contact with during his recent work at a haberdashery. The final and perhaps most damaging revelation came from the prosecution's key witness. She had originally claimed to have seen Smith near the crime scene. However, during cross-examination, she admitted that police had shown her Smith while he was already in custody before she had picked him out of a formal lineup. This revelation severely weakened her testimony, as it showed she had been influenced, even unintentionally, by the authorities. With each passing day, the defense dismantled the prosecution's case piece by piece. Chapter 12. Verdict and Consequences. It took the jury only a few hours to reach their decision. When they returned to the courtroom, the foreman's voice echoed clearly in the silent space. Not guilty. William Smith's shoulders dropped in relief. His family broke into quiet sobs. The presiding judge, Baron Bramwell, delivered a powerful statement that would later be quoted for years. It is due to the prisoner to say he leaves this court without a stain upon his character. But while Smith walked free, many questions remained unanswered. If he hadn't killed Sarah Milson, then who had? The police, clearly embarrassed by their missteps and the revelation that they had influenced the witness, quietly closed the investigation. No further arrests were made, and just like that, the case was shelved. Yet the impact of the trial was not forgotten. It triggered meaningful changes in how police handled criminal cases, especially when it came to witness identification. The case also underlined the growing importance of scientific evidence and the need for more careful analysis rather than relying on assumptions or flawed testimony. In addition, the trial marked a turning point in the history of criminal defense. Lawyers had shown that a well-prepared and well-argued defense could challenge even the most confident prosecution. Still, for Sarah Milson's friends and family, these reforms offered little comfort. They had no justice, only questions, and a grief that would never truly fade. Chapter 13, Epilogue, What Remains Today. The place where it all happened. Cannon Street no longer exists. It was torn down long ago, and in its place now stand tall steel and glass office towers. The Bevington leather business, which had thrived for decades after the murder, eventually closed its doors in the 1960s. And yet the mystery still lives on. At the National Archives in Kew, the original case file reference MEP 381 is kept for anyone who wants to dig deeper. Over the years, historians and true crime enthusiasts have examined the evidence-proposed theories and debated the case's strangest details. One mystery remains the most haunting: the unknown woman seen on the doorstep the night of the murder. Who was she, and what role did she play? Then there's the question of Sarah Milson's missing shoes. Why were they taken, and what did it mean? Despite all the attention the case has received, no one has ever been able to say for certain who killed Sarah Milson. The killer slipped through the cracks of history and was never brought to justice. In a strange twist, Sarah Milson became more famous in death than she ever was in life. Her murder stands as a chilling reminder that beneath the polished surface of Victorian society lay hidden violence, dark secrets, and mysteries that defy explanation. Even now, 157 years later, as London traffic rushes past the modern buildings that stand where her home once was, very few people stop to think about the quiet housekeeper who lost her life on that rainy April night. But for those who do know her story, the questions remain. Who really killed Sarah Milson? And why did they leave behind such a strange, confusing crime scene? The Cannon Street murder remains a true Victorian mystery, one that proves some secrets are buried too deep to ever be fully uncovered. The truth is out, but is it too late? Do you think Sarah deserved it? Let us know below.